Before we jump in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. It seriously helps the channel grow. All right, let's get started. When the future collapses and her crew lies broken, Luffy is offered an impossible bargain. Give up everything she is and be sent back in time for one last chance. Reborn as her past self, Luffy carries the weight of loss, regret, and love she refuses to lose again. Every smile hides fear, every reckless charge is calculated, and every choice risks unraveling fate itself. As she fights to save her nakama before tragedy strikes, the price of changing destiny grows heavier, and the question becomes whether saving them is worth losing herself. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Once in a Lifetime by AlcoholicIntrovert. Respect to author.
Chapter 1, The Devil's Deal. Any last words? The words were but a whisper as thunder rumbled angrily from the sky. The sky itself was filled with ominous dark clouds, and lightning shot across the sky. The words, sneered by a marine, were directed at a young man, chained and helpless on a platform before a large crowd of people. Angrily, he glared at the man, poison on his tongue, but unable to speak through the blood he continued to cough up. The square was silent, for the most part. All that was heard for a few moments was the gurgling, choked sound the man made as he spit out a mouthful blood. Tears streamed down his face, only adding to the pitiful sight. Many of the local citizens' eyes flooded with tears as well, holding their hands over their mouths to prevent the sounds of pain to escape. They had grown up with the boy, seen him turn from a clumsy, ridiculous and reckless child, to a strong, albeit still reckless and childish, man. They were fond of the boy, and seeing him like this, it hurt. Many of them had cleared the square to stand aside, many more ditching the area, but a few standing to watch. Among them were a dark-haired woman, a bandit, and the mayor of the city. Although they could do nothing, they would be here until the end. "You killed them," he finally growled, his voice breaking off into another body-wrenching sob. "You killed them, you. He never thought he would see this day. He had hoped he would never have to, but even he could not deny the sight that lay before him." He shook restlessly in his bindings, caused the sea stone shackles to dig into his wrists, and the sea stone blade to embed itself deeper into his back. He could handle the pain. After everything, the physical pain, the blood, the wounds, the scars, they were nothing to him. Like a mosquito's bite, small and unimportant. Like always, he could pretend it didn't exist, even when it began to itch and swell. Until now, he had simply swatted whoever dared bite him. Now, he was helpless. Death awaited him. He could handle his own death. He really could. He had fought for his dream until the end, going through no easy task in his attempt to reach his goal. For that, he could easily accept his own fate that would meet him on this platform. 8 bodies before him had been reduced to nothing more than ribbons of blood, skin and bone. The only thing that remained clear were the looks of pain buried beneath layers of blood. It was something he wished with all his might that he could stop, that he could erase from his mind. This couldn't possibly be happening. He wasn't supposed to regret. "You killed them," he sobbed to himself, and the marine simply sneered at him. "I couldn't save them. I couldn't. Why did they? I wasn't supposed to regret. Why?" There was a pregnant pause that the marine broke as he tsked softly. A well-aimed kick to Luffy's ribs had him wincing. How touching. Shouts echoed throughout the clearing as the man gave the signal. It was so small, a flick of his wrist, that would end Luffy's life where he stood. The blades pressed against his skin, into his body, and his mouth fell open as the men ripped the weapons out as quickly as they had pierced him. He had failed. Another shaky breath, and blood poured from his mouth as darkness tainted his vision. His eyes fluttered shut softly, the pain fading slowly and being replaced with a numbness that spread through his body. Soon, he would be with his nakama, he was sure. So very young. The voice shook him, but not as much as the gentle hand that reached forward and cupped his face. Long, delicate fingers forced his face up, and despite never wanting to open them again, his eyes found the woman. A small, forlorn smile graced her lips as she watched him with curiosity. She was observing him. So much pain. The square had fallen silent. It seemed she was not of his imagination, nor a hallucination in his last moments. She stood on the platform, her form flickering between opaque and a shimmering translucency. A warning shot fired through the air, but it simply passed through the woman with a water-like ripple. She didn't even turn to look at who had fired. There was nervous shuffling, another order, and another round of shots fired. Much like the first one, they simply passed through her frame. The firing ceased, and the soft ripples faded. "So irritating," the woman murmured, and with a flick of her wrist, all those that had fired were thrown backwards by an invisible force. All without looking away from Luffy, who was still very much alive. His eyes were wide as he stared at her. "They are fools." Dark eyes bore through him and he found himself lost in the deep ocean color. He opened his mouth, spitting up another mouthful of blood at the woman's feet. She glanced at it with raised eyebrows before stroking his face carefully. "I can take it away, you know," she murmured. It was nothing louder than a whisper, but it seemed as though she had shouted it across the increasingly crowded square. She leant before him, her form shimmering with the movement. Her breath was cold on his ear as she leant forward. "I can give you another chance to save them." Luffy's eyes widened. "What would you give up for them, I wonder?" The woman purred, stroking Luffy's face thoughtfully. "To see them walk with the living again." "Anything," he said immediately, too quickly. The words came with a fresh mouthful of blood. "Everything." The woman's smile turned triumph, as if she had just won a war. She pulled out a cloth, wiping his face free of blood and tears, and she knelt in front of him. His eyes were still wide, fixed on her as she gently brushed hair out of his face. He was mesmerized, not by her undeniable beauty, but by the promise that her words held. She leant in once more, so he could have felt her breath on his ear. As it was, he much too wrapped up in his own numbness and the possibility, just a possibility, of his Nakama's survival. "Would you give up your body?" The words came in a soft, alluring coo. He nodded, his eyes falling shut to the lullaby that was dark, meaningless words. There was no way he could bring them back, surely, no power in the universe could restore those broken bodies to their lively forms. But he nodded. Even if they could not see it, he wanted everyone to know exactly what he would give for his Nakama. "Would you give up your soul?" She had withdrawn from his ear and the words came as she kissed his closed eyelids. Again, he nodded, his eyes fluttering open with a renewed sense of hope. A weak flame, burning through a raging storm, but a flame nonetheless. He would give everything he had and more. He would save his Nakama. Would you give up your dream? His dream. For so long, he had wanted to be king of the pirates. It was his dream from the moment he had met Shanks. To be free. But now, looking down at the torn bodies of his Nakama, the word dream meant nothing to him. In that moment, his friends' lives, their aspirations, they were what mattered above all else. He nodded one final time. "Everything, I will give everything." There was another pause, and even the sky seemed to have stopped rumbling in its anger. And then there was laughter. It wasn't cruel, per se, but it was not a happy, warming laughter. "My name is Ayum. I will help you save your Nakama, Monkey D. Luffy." But after, she lowered his voice, not that it mattered, so that only he could hear. Her words sent a chill down his back, but he didn't flinch. "You will belong to me. Your body, your heart, and your soul will be mine. Do you agree?" "Yes." His voice was sure now, less shaky. If this was what it took to save his Nakama, so be it. It was his fault it had ended like this, without their dreams being reached. He had promised that they would achieve their dreams, that he wouldn't get in the way, and then this had happened. He was going to fix it, no matter what it cost him. "Take my hands, Luffy." Luffy took a deep, shuddering breath. His body, pierced by the execution blades, had died. His arms were stiff and heavy as he raised them. It was only his soul, still caged in the body, at least for now, that moved him. Soft hands took his with gentleness, her thumb rubbing across the back of his hand. Then, everything went dark. Chapter 2. Zoro's Timeless Promise. The first thing that registered was panic. He couldn't locate who it belonged to, until the thudding of his heart overwhelmed the lull of the waves lapping against a ship. Possibly. Amongst the pounding and the lapping, there was something else. Voices. Definitely. Although he couldn't identify who was speaking, or even what they were saying, there were people. What was going on? It was dark. He could feel nothing but the sheen of sweat and blood that covered his body. Blood. That wasn't right. When had he started bleeding? The last he remembered, he had climbed into a barrel as his boat got eaten by a storm. But that wasn't right either. There was something more. The voices grew louder as they drew nearer. He shifted in his confined space. There was something familiar about this. Blood. Lots of blood. Steel against bone, gushing blood. He let out a quiet cry as the memories rushed back. It caused him no physical pain, but the emotions that crashed down upon him. Light. Too bright. He felt no pain, no cold, no hot, but something burned inside him. It was like fire in his veins, confusing him to no end. Memories, scattered and unorganized, rushed through his mind. He couldn't differentiate which were his. He was dumped from the barrel, unceremoniously onto the hard wooden floor. There were a few surprised shouts, and his hands came up over his ears to block it out. How could he possibly expect to focus with this noise? It was as if his insides were fighting with each other, his head throbbing as much as his heart. His body was on fire, liquid flame spreading through his body.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Where was Chopper when he needed the reindeer? Chopper. Where was he? Blood. Matted, blood-stained fur. Zoro. Nami. Usopp. Sanji. Chopper. Robin. Frankie. His eyes snapped open, a pained noise leaving his throat. Are you okay? It was the kind, familiar voice that broke him from his trance. It was no wonder the barrel had been so heavy, but still. The young boy had been surprised when a girl had fallen out of the barrel, bleeding and very close to death. He had, at first, averted his eyes upon realizing she wore nothing but a pair of blue shorts that clung loosely to her thin hips. Her eyes were red and puffy, as though she had just been crying. The only things that seemed to be untouched by drying blood were her two accessories. A golden anklet wrapped around her ankle with small, red gems cluttered on it, and a straw hat that sat on top of her untamed black hair. Curiosity at the girl's lack of movement brought his eyes back to her shaking figure. Upon second glance, Kobe decided she was easily one of the most gorgeous people he had ever laid eyes on. Beautiful, and broken, her eyes were darkened as though they had seen all the evils of the world. He felt tempted to check her back, to see if she had been claimed by the wretched nobles. After all, who else could hurt this woman that much? That's what he thought before he saw the wounds. At first, they were barely noticeable, but due to the rough treatment she had received, the wounds had reopened. Blood began to pool around her. As she curled into herself, he saw the wounds that caused the blood. 2 puncture wounds in each of her shoulders seemed to go all the way through her and out her sides, above her hips. A large cut dug into her back, seeming to miss anything vital by mere centimeters. They were execution wounds. Kobe would recognize him. He had seen enough of them. If they were truly execution wounds, there was no way she would still be alive. She couldn't be. The 3 pirates that had tipped the barrel took off with panicked screams. Kobe ignored them, falling to his knees before the girl. "Are you okay?" he asked, trying his best to remain calm. She blinked, looking up at him hazily. Despite her bloodied appearance, she seemed to be in no physical pain. No, what she held in her eyes was a lot deeper than anything physical. It was as if she had been ripped from everything she knew, everything she loved. Her eyes cleared after a moment of watching him, a look of confusion taking place. Kobe. What? He wanted to help her, he really did, but his name took him off guard. He couldn't possibly have met her before. He wouldn't have forgotten someone like her, surely. He reached forward, aiming for her shoulder and then thinking the better of it and lowering his arm. "What? How do you know my?" he began, but it was cut off by the strange woman's strangled gasp. In a sudden burst of adrenaline she jumped to her feet, grabbed his hand and took off running through the ship. After only making it a few room away, Kobe felt something warm wash over his hands. He looked up to see himself getting soaked in the blood of the woman. Then, she began to stagger. She quickly lost her balance, the loss of blood far too great, and fell over. Kobe managed to catch her and help her lay down. They hadn't made it far at all, and Kobe was sure the trail of blood would soon give away their location. As it was, the woman would bleed to death before they were found anyway. They had, coincidentally, made it to a storage room. Kobe stumbled around the room, trying to find bandages he could tend to the girl with. He grabbed a sheet of cloth as well before returning to her side. He wasn't sure why he was so keen to help her, but he did, feeling compelled. When he returned, she had hoisted herself up and watched him. She looked so confused, but without pain, even as she bled out. Finally, her eyes turned from his face to the anklet and glared at it. "I don't understand what's going on," the girl muttered, running her fingers over the odd-colored stones. "Well, that makes 2 of us," Kobe said as he threw the sheet over her head. He instantly knelt down, pulling the sheet away just enough to reveal one of the wounds. It continued to gush blood, and he quickly pressed a patch of gauze against the gaping wound. As soon as it absorbed enough of the blood, he pulled it away quickly and splashed disinfectant on the wound. He quickly replaced it with new gauze, taping this one down. Through the whole process, she never winced. "I don't know who you are, but you've landed yourself on a very dangerous pirate ship. I'd say it wasn't suitable for a young lady, but the captain herself is one, if you can consider that a lady." The woman looked up at him, cocking her head in confusion. She didn't seem to process his words, but instead continued looking unsure. "Do you not recognize me?" When he shook his head, she gave a frustrated cry. She looked at him desperately, as if she had the answers he needed. As it was, he was completely helpless in this situation. He moved onto her shoulder, ignoring how easily she exposed her chest, and how her eyes bore into him as he worked. "What's your name?" Perhaps that, at least, would be familiar. Monkey D. Luffy. Perhaps not. "Well, I'm Kobe. You already knew that, though. Why are you in such bad condition?" "I don't know. I mean, everything is so confusing to me. I'm still trying to figure everything out. I was supposed to die and yet I'm here, and alive," she exclaimed, and much to his horror, she let the blanket fall and groped her chest shamelessly. "I'm definitely not supposed to have these things. I just want answers." Kobe wished he could help, he really did, but he continued treating her in silence. He let her ramble, and much to her seemingly displeasure, answers were what she got. Only a few moments after finished bandaging the second one, the first wound was soaked through. It was a wonder she hadn't passed out yet. Sighing, he peeled it back, only to have his hand slapped away irritably. He turned intent on giving the person a piece of his mind, when he came face to face with a Luffy look-alike. "You woke me up." The new woman yawned, stretching lean limbs over her head before kneeling before Luffy. They did look startling similar, the second one appearing older, more mature in multiple ways. Beyond that, the second had a shimmering around her body, as though she was not physically there, but an illusion from the heat. She took one look at Luffy's wounds before making a soft, tisk, noise. Well, my calculations were a bit off. Looks like they'll be permanent now. She placed her hands on Luffy's shoulder, and Luffy relaxed immensely beneath her fingers. Kobe watched in bewilderment. The woman couldn't possibly be healing her, could she? But it seemed she was, and when Ayum pulled her hands away, only bright pink scars remained. Luffy pouted at the woman. It's your fault I'm alive. What the hell did you do? You're the one who wanted to save them, Luffy. I'm giving you the chance. So they are still alive. She whispered, her voice almost silent and tight with emotion. Ayum's eyes seemed to soften at this, and she nodded in response. It quickly faded, however, when she saw Luffy's state of undress. Now, put some clothes on. It's improper for a woman to go around in that. Why am I a girl anyways? Luffy pouted, taking the sheet from a thoroughly frightened Kobe and wrapping it around herself carelessly. Ayum didn't look pleased, per se, but it was better than running around completely exposed. After your time is up and you have saved your nakama, the body is mine. It was part of the agreement, was it not? And I much prefer this form, take care of it, will you? And the anklet. It is what binds our souls together in this deal. Without it, the deal and your sacrifice will be void. Luffy just nodded, and Ayum turned to glance at Kobe. She frowned, as if something about him was off to her. Kobe, you won't go telling people about me and Luffy, will you? That'd be an awful inconvenience. Before he even got a chance to respond, she was gone. Without a trace, nothing to follow, no indication to where she disappeared to. Instead, he just turned back to Luffy, who was staring at the anklet with a mixture of disgust and awe. After a moment, she spoke up again. I think it's blood, Kobe. Indeed, it was the same color of freshly spilled blood. Over the last few years, he had seen enough of it. Even so, he was sure that was impossible. Kobe sighed, reaching out to help her up. He was shaking as he did so, ever so slightly. What he had just seen and heard had shaken him, no doubt. He was trying to make sense of things that couldn't be possible. Look, let's just focus on getting you off this ship, okay? She was probably as shaken, if not more, than him. He helped her up, making sure the cloth was appropriately fastened. Any of the men running around this disgusting ship and catching an eyeful. She watched him wearily, unsure. You know, you're different. Aren't you scared of Alvida? They walked through the ship, surprisingly relaxed. Kobe would usually be shaking and crying at this point. What was going on? Well, yes, I suppose. But she's not much of a challenge. There are much more powerful pirates. Luffy turned to him with surprised eyes. You still wanna be a marine though, right? Well, actually, he began, but whatever he was going to say was cut off as Alvida decided to drop into the conversion. Coming from behind, 4 pirates held Luffy and Kobe in a tight grip. He already is, Alvida taunted, sounding slightly amused as she swung her weapon threateningly. Her eyes turned to the struggling, scared boy with dangerous eyes. Thought you could trick us, little marine. Well, we've been onto you since the start. Thought you could fool us with your little tricks, catch us when I was weak. Alvida looked no different than when Luffy had first laid eyes on her, which wasn't saying much for the overly large woman. Her beady eyes found Luffy, a sneer pulling at her lips. Did you call for help? Couldn't handle us on your own. Before Luffy could fully process what was happening, Kobe had broken free of the pirate's hold. With it, he pulled the sword from the man's belt and charged Alvida straight on. Luffy's eyes widened as she watched, an expression that could easily be mistaken for fear. It was actually surprise. What had happened to the Kobe she knew? This certainly wasn't him. Despite his fearlessness, the sword shattered upon one strike from her iron mace. Kobe was knocked back by move, slipping against the floor and falling. Alvida laughed and Luffy felt memories rush at her at the speed of light. Her nakama getting slaughtered before her flashed before her eyes. She shook in the pirate grip, a mix of emotion, turmoil and anger running through her. Ha, she's shaking, must be terrified. Poor little thing. One of the men holding her murmured to the other. She could hear the sneer in his voice, and her frown deepened. Lassie, I could give you some good comfort. You'll need it after watching your friend die.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
That was it. She broke free from their grasp in a powerful burst of haki. The last thing the 2 men saw before falling unconscious was her infuriated scowl as she sent them flying across the boat. She let out an angry hiss, turning back to where Alvida had stopped in her attack against Kobe. In fact, everything seemed to stop on the ship, all eyes watching her with horror. Don't you dare lay a finger on this kid, she said, watching as the woman straightened upon being addressed. It wasn't hard to see the power that radiated from this woman. It would be beyond foolish to challenge her. Alvida stepped back slowly, feeling the power tangle around her being, overpowering and crushing. A few men by the side of the boat collapsed, but she didn't dare unleash enough to send Kobe unconscious. Kobe, come on, we're getting off this ship. For the first half an hour, the boat ride was relatively silent. Kobe couldn't figure out whether the woman was an enemy, friend, marine or pirate. Perhaps she was a pirate hunter or rebel. He didn't know. Quite frankly, he wasn't going to ask either. All he knew was she was far more powerful than anyone he had ever met. She had completely ruined a plan to capture Alvida, but he had also saved her. He wasn't stupid, and despite how she looked and acted, neither was Alvida. It would have only taken her so long to figure out, and had Luffy not been there, he didn't want to think of the possibilities. The woman had been, for most of the journey, been staring at the water with a forlorn look. She was deep in thought, or maybe even drifting off from exhaustion. After the burst of power, she seemed exhausted, as though her body couldn't handle the amount of power she had exerted. Of course he wasn't expecting her to speak, and she jumped when he did. I know you don't know me, Kobe, but I know you. You heard what Ayum said earlier. I'm still trying to figure everything out myself but. Luffy said, a light hum in her tone as she looked up and offered Kobe a smile. We're really good friends from where I came from. And where was that? I don't know. But where I came from, you were really scared when we first met. I guess things change. She'd paused. It was weird. If she had simply gone back in time, why would things be any different than the first time? What about meeting her nakama? Would they have chosen different fates, just as Kobe had? All I know is that even though I was a pirate, and you were in Vice Admiral. Kobe's jaw dropped. Surely, she was speaking nonsense. There was no way that he, the weakling he was, could possibly become Vice Admiral. Maybe she really was just crazy. But she smiled and he felt himself smile back despite his lack of faith in her words. Then, the words sank in. Why you're a pirate? He asked. It wasn't as though it were impossible. He knew the chances. He just didn't want it to be true. She turned to him with a toothy grin and nodded. Oh yeah, you're already a marine. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Why would you save me then? Like I said, we're friends where I come from. It doesn't matter that you're a marine and I'm a pirate. He was at a loss for words. It was his job to hunt pirates, to bring justice but, something told him he couldn't possibly turn this girl over to the Marines. She didn't even have a bounty anyways. So how did you end up in this state? I was at my execution when Ayum saved me, she said, unflinchingly. He had heard from Ayum, and he was much smarter than her. Lying would get her nowhere. She was aware of this when she looked him in the eyes and frowned. These scars are from my execution. There was no way she could have survived that. The execution wound was directed so it would be an instant death. He knew it had everything to do with the woman before, Ayum, but he didn't like it. There was something dark going about it all. How else would Ayum be able to heal the multiple wounds in mere moments? They looked painful, and she had gone through it all just to save her nakama. Kobe honestly couldn't believe it. It was just, unfathomable. For 2 days, he and Luffy had traveled on a rickety old boat given to them by Alvida. They had survived on limited resources, and Luffy had for the most part, remained quiet. They had still gotten to know each other, talking quietly about their dreams and aspirations before taking turns sleeping. Luffy seemed to know all about him. It was almost scary. It wasn't hard to break her shell, in all honesty. She was a happy person, and she wasn't often bothered by the struggles she had lived through. She would instantly close down if you even touched on the subject of her execution though. It was a topic Kobe very quickly learned to avoid, and hence she remained happy. He had seen her happy before, of course. She was never exactly upset, except as she stirred in her sleep from a nightmare he couldn't imagine the horrors of. But he had never seen her this bright, either. She was simply radiant, perched upon the Navy base's cement fence as she watched him. Time seemed to pause for her and she had eyes for no one but him. Him, the man in a haramaki. Him, the one that used three-sword style in a way no one else dared. Him, who was a well-known pirate hunter and would have her head in an instant if it so pleased him. Kobe would have never guessed that he would be one of her nakama. When she demanded to see him immediately, he had to convince her to stop and eat first. Surely she had just been curious, but even food couldn't keep her distracted. She had wrapped up a few pieces of food to go, holding them with her as she walked determinedly towards the base. She had almost jumped over the wall and ran to the hunter, but instead restrained herself and perched on the edge. Zoro, she called, wanting to do so much more than call his name. She wanted to pull him into her arms, hold him, feel his beating heart, know he was alive. She wanted that with all of her nakama, but for now she could just have him. The demon looked up at her, and when she looked into his eyes, she realized that in itself was enough. Relief flooded through her. He was alive. He was here. He could be saved. He would once again become hers. The sudden relief caused her to return to her usual, immature self. It was a side Kobe had never seen, as the girl cackled childishly on the wall. She called his name again, and this time she smiled brightly at him. He looked surprised at the gesture. Kobe wondered if she had managed to melt the demon's heart as easily as she had melted his own. What the hell do you want? He asked, his voice cold. That would be a no, then. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew more radiant. She was just too happy to see him alive. It didn't matter if Zoro didn't know her. Zoro's eyes scanned her, and she was well aware of what he saw. Right now, she was nothing but a strange woman wearing nothing but some bloodied cloths, watching him. She didn't seem to plan on leaving anytime soon, so he tried scaring her. "If you're just gonna hang around, why don't you let me go?" He grinned, hoping to scare her a bit. It didn't even seem to faze her, unlike her companion. The Marine didn't truly have anything to fear, but Zoro was truly terrifying. "Don't do it, Luffy. There's obviously a reason he's tied up. He'll probably kill us." Luffy chuckled to herself, giving Kobe an odd look. Did he really believe that she couldn't fight Zoro if it came to it? "Nah, I'm far stronger." No sooner had the words left her mouth, that a village child stumbled into the area. How she had gotten in, Luffy didn't pay attention to, but there she was, just as it had happened in her memory before. Despite knowing that in her time, Helmeppo wasn't so bad, had even helped Kobe become stronger, she still felt herself become cold as he smashed Rika's rice balls beneath his foot. He had her thrown over the fence, and Luffy caught her carefully while Kobe watched in horror. She barely paid him any mind, checking over the child before sending her home, ensuring her that Zoro appreciated the act of kindness. The girl was practically in tears, nodding and taking off. With a glint in her eye, she easily scaled the wall and jumped down once more. She crouched before Zoro, pulling out the food she had stored earlier. "You need to eat," she said, holding up the meat to his lips. He looked reluctant, but the food was still warm and his stomach rumbled angrily at the thought of denying food any longer. He let her feed him for a few moments, until they were interrupted by Helmeppo once more. "Who do you think? 3 days. She cut him off, not once ceasing in feeding Zoro. She stopped, however, when the swordsman suddenly stopped eating. Shiryu wrapped the food, tying it with a crude knot before rising to her feet. There was a knowing smirk on her lips. "You want to kill Zoro in 3 days. That was your original plan, was it not, Helmeppo? You said if he managed a month, but you were going to kill him before the week was up." Everyone watched the scene unfold with bated breath. "Who the hell told you that? How do you know?" he demanded angrily. Zoro's eyes widened at the indirect confession. Instead of keeping their promise, their side of the deal. His eyes darted to the girl, who was now openly glaring at the Marine with her hands on her hips. How did she, of all people, know? "Well then, I'm going to hold a public execution for him in 3 days. And if you don't shut your trap about it." "Stop this," Kobe intercepted, stepping between them. "This is not how Marines should be acting. We are justice, what has this man done besides that?" "Can it, you shrimp," Helmeppo sneered. "Unless you want to be executed amongst these two." Luffy froze, looking up at Helmeppo with a scoff. She brought her hands up, tracing the scars on her bare shoulders. For a moment, she looked so very distant, as if she was remembering a distant memory, before her face scrunched up. When she returned to the world, there was a dark shadow in her eyes. "You, kill me. I've already seen my execution. I'm already dead." Helmeppo stumbled back in obvious, overwhelming fear. Her voice was so cold, void of any emotion except heartbreaking pain. Even Zoro seemed to be freaked out, and Luffy seemed to realize she said far too much. The Marines scattered after that, frightened and planning revenge. She turned back to Zoro, an apologetic look in her eyes. "Zoro, you should join my pirate crew," she said with a teasing smile, although she knew the answer. "You're a pirate. Go figure." "There's no way I'm joining your crew," Zoro huffed. He felt disappointed. For mere moments, he had been scared by her. He had been weak. He closed his eyes, hoping she would be gone when he opened them. That wasn't the case. Instead, she had unwrapped the food again and held it out in offering. What kind of pirate was this? Once again, he allowed her to feed her as her companion stood shivering behind her. A pirate that took company from a Marine and sought out a pirate hunter for her crew. He never thought he would see the day. Nor did he think he would see the day he was reduced to weak enough that he would allow a strange woman to feed him. After he had finished, she simply discarded the cloth without a single care. "Zoro, I'm going to go get your swords back, and you'll have to join my crew." Without waiting for a reply, she took off straight for the Marine base. He sighed to himself and thought about what she had said earlier. There was no way she had been through an execution and survived. He had never seen her face on a wanted poster, either. Luffy really is an odd pirate, but not a bad one. You don't say. Luffy ran through the halls without the slightest inkling of where she should be going. She hadn't paid attention the first time, and she wasn't about to. Instead, she simply ran until she came across Himpo's hard-to-miss girl room. She broke down the door, not caring if Helmeppo was inside, and gathered the katanas into her arms. With a peek out the window, her suspicions had been confirmed. Zoro and Kobe were surrounded with Marines, no hope of escaping at that point. The rifles went up, and Luffy jumped from the window fearlessly. She landed without grace in front of the Marine and pirate hunter, stopping the bullets and sending them ricocheting from her body in multiple directions. Although she could have used hockey, being rubber made it so much easier. She was just glad that through everything, she still was rubber. Everyone was fairly shocked, including Kobe, who looked odd. "Zoro," she called, without turning to look at him. I can give you your swords back so long as you join my crew, okay? Don't worry too much, okay? I won't get in the way of your dreams. Just become the world's best swordsman while I become. She stopped. She had given up her dream. She had given it up for a new one. Become the best swordsman while I strive to be the Pirate King. Luffy, I swear on my life, you will become the Pirate King. Zoro's words echoed through the air. She remembered them all too well. She knew she would never become the Pirate King now. But her nakama would be safe, and that was far more important to her. You really are a demon, aren't you? Not even giving me a choice in the matter. He laughed. I guess I have no choice. Luffy smiled. It was no different than the first time. At least, not to her. She concentrated on getting Zoro untied. She finished one, before handing him his swords to take care of the rest. She felt the attack coming, knowing the exact place the sword would strike, but she also felt Zoro's move. The sword came up behind her back and Zoro pulled her closer to him to effectively block the attack. She pressed against his chest for just a moment. It was enough. Everything, in that moment, was Zoro. Zoro's scent, his feel, his life. He was here. Zoro. Duck. She turned away from him and without waiting, did a complete sweep of the area. She didn't allow any haki or too much power to back up her attack. These Marines meant no harm, but only did as Captain Morgan said. What exactly are you? Zoro asked, looking around at the damage with amusement. Luffy just grinned at him, pulling her cheeks childishly as she answered, I'm a rubberman. She had learned early on, during her fight with Alvida, that she was still tapped into her haki. However, her body was not yet fully trained in that area. She would need a lot of training before her body could handle the immense amounts of haki she usually used. It was probably better, anyways. Many of the people she would fight before leaving the East Blue would become allies. She didn't want to hurt them. She did, however, want to hurt Captain Morgan, who she approached. She stepped carefully over each Marine until she stood before Morgan with a scowl on her face. Fight me, she demanded. His eyes narrowed on her. He was not used to being challenged. Did this shrimp really think she stood a chance? He lunged forward, and she jumped away just a moment too late. Rip. She looked down at her now ripped clothing. Too late, she had dodged the attack. There went her makeshift clothing. She glanced around, frowning when many of the Marines blushed at her semi-exposed chest. She just stooped her head and continued to fight Morgan. It never bothered her as a man, why should it bother her now? She turned to help Kobe when he cried out for her. She was furious at this point. Kobe was one of them. Why were they treating him like this? They knew he was a Marine. She sent a punch Helmeppo's way, enjoying watching the man go flying back. Behind her, she heard Morgan fall to the ground. Good job, Zoro. No problem, Captain. Please, run away. Don't fight. Luffy begged, tears running down his face as he stared at his few remaining nakama. He couldn't let them die. Not like this. Not for him. Don't die. Everyone could hear the protective growl that escaped Zoro's throat. You think we are going to let you die, Luffy? You're our captain. Let us fight for you, like you have fought for us. Luffy fell to her knees, tears threatening to fall. Zoro's last words haunted her more than anyone's. Perhaps it was because he was the last to go, the last to fall. Thanks for everything, Captain. Luffy forced the sobs away, refusing to let them surface. She blinked back the tears. She didn't want to look weak. Not after she had gotten her best friend back. Plus, she was his captain. She couldn't let herself cry. Zoro approached cautiously, wondering what could have caused her to react like that. He crouched before her, an odd look of concern on his face. When he realized her lack of real clothes, he pulled off his shirt and threw it over her head with little hesitation. She scrambled to get it on, glad for the distraction. She stood up, leaving the sheets behind. Zoro's shirt was far too big for her lithe body. Where Zoro was hulking muscles, hers were small and lean. The shirt slipped down past her shoulders as she tried to keep up with her first mate, and came down a little past the waistband of her torn-up shorts. She adjusted it awkwardly before positioning herself next to Zoro, allowing him to lean on her. The food she had given him earlier had helped, but he was still weak. She knew he would not admit to needing help, but allowed him to lean on her when he eventually slumped down in exhaustion. She hooked an arm around his waist, looking up at him in amazement. He was alive, and once again, with her. Her best friend. He didn't even have any of the scars. Luffy had gotten used to him having the scar over his chest and one over his eye. But sure enough, his chest was bare of any mark, which she marveled at, and he looked at her curiously through two eyes, not just one. Rika and her mother once again offered them food. For a while, they stayed with Rika, chatting. Rika's mother, a kind woman who had welcomed them, gave Luffy a new pair of clothes. She returned Zoro's shirt after emerging from a back room wearing a tank top and a new pair of shorts. The shirt didn't cover her scars in the least. Even the long jagged one across her back remained. They didn't stay long after that, and they left in a tiny and untrustworthy boat. She had looked at Zoro with a grin and told him rather mysteriously that they would soon be getting a much nicer boat. He didn't bother ask. Although had just met her, and knew next to nothing about her, he knew she would tell him when the time came or if she wanted to. For now though, there would be many unexplained mysteries about this girl he now addressed as Captain, who showed up to him covered in blood with a carefree smile, hiding so much pain and showing her odd scars. The anklet was also something worrisome. She seemed protective of it, and avoided all questions of it. It gave Zoro an uneasy feeling. Kobe had come up to him, wanting to discuss something the kid deemed important. Whatever it was, Kobe had changed his mind quickly. Zoro, Kobe had asked as soon as Luffy had stood up to go for a change of clothing. Can I talk to you? Zoro looked up from his food with a mildly annoyed expression on his face. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Luffy smiling at Kobe and pointing to her anklet. She lifted her finger and pressed it against her lips. She didn't want him to tell him about the anklet. Then, she disappeared into the other room. What is it? Zoro asked, once Luffy disappeared. Kobe stuttered at first, but told Zoro the whole story of how he had met Luffy. He excluded what he had learned of the anklet, Ayum, and Luffy being from the future. It seems she wanted it to remain a secret. Zoro gave him a suspicious look when he spoke of her wounds healing, but said nothing. Towards the end of his tale, Kobe smiled nervously, unable to say what was truly on his mind. She's from the future. Some part of him screamed. She has an enchanted anklet, very possibly made with your blood. A second part called, she should be dead. Bad thoughts. She's probably less human than you. No, no, no. She lived through her execution and is doing this for you. He couldn't say that. And I know, in only 2 days at sea with her, she'll probably be your best friend. I know that's how it was for me, he finally managed to force out. At the time, Zoro had no idea just how right the kid had been. Chapter 3, A Navigator's Tears. Zoro had completely underestimated just how right Kobe was. It was impossible to not like the girl who aspired to become the pirate queen. For days they spent on the tiny boat, talking through the night and occasionally waking up with tangled limbs, the swordsman had quickly taken to the young captain. The first day he woke up with her curled against his side, rubbery arms around his torso, he had considered pushing her off. The next day it happened again, and again. He just gave in and allowed what small comfort his presence seemed to give. He could see her strength, something many would look over due to her childish attitude. He could see her spirit, something that seemed almost broken, but never absent. Never. Her spirit burned most brightly of everything. Of course, that wasn't to say the rubber girl didn't have her moments. Only a while into their journey, she had herself carried off by a giant bird. Something told him she could have fought it, but he said nothing. Then she had fallen from a cliff after getting hypnotized. Although he refused to believe she had died, he was still been scared. The cannonball, well, there was way of saying whether or not that was an accident. Still, she didn't look particularly unhappy ending up as a chore girl. It was probably on purpose. A majority of the time, she was cheerful. For days after finding a new nakama, she would celebrate in her own little way. There was always a hop to her step, or a hum in words, or something that made her just seem that much more cheery than before. Even before someone became her nakama, Zoro noticed her eyes would light up seeing someone. It brightened her whole being immensely. He had once seen it aimed at him. He couldn't help but give her an affectionate smile whenever one of the true grins split across her face. Then there were times, he couldn't quite explain it. She wasn't quite unhappy, but perhaps she was and he simply didn't know her well enough. It was more as though she were remembering something from long ago, like being forced to watch a painful memory from her childhood. When they had received going merry, she had walked around the ship like this for at least a day. Always, she was brushing her fingers against the wood, lying on the deck, and sleeping on the figurehead. Even when the nights grew chilly, she remained out there. She snapped out of it easily enough. The prospect of a new island, a new nakama, a new adventure, anything distracting, really. But that didn't stop the time where she would drop down beside him and fall against him. He didn't know why she chose him as her support, but he would let her stay. Perhaps it was because he was her first mate. Sometimes, just watching him train would be enough for her. Either way, his presence seemed to offer a comfort no one else could. There were times when she was deep in thought, her brows furrowed together as she attempted to remember something. When she failed, she would shrug it off with a careless smile. It was after these times when she ended up in trouble soon after. The bird incident was one of these times. She would do something completely idiotic and worry him half to death and then laugh about it later. Each time a new nakama appeared, in the oddest places, might you add, it was as though a small weight had been lifted from her shoulders. At the same time, another weight had been added. There was always some type of burden when you had the lives of so many people on your shoulders. At first, Zoro found it strange that she had a pirate hunter and a pirate thief on her crew, but he got used to it. She seemed to attract the strangest people. After Nami and Usopp joined, it was getting easier to accept. However, there was a point it was drawing the line. When he saw the telltale sparkle in her eyes, he immediately followed her gaze to find the reason. He certainly was not expecting the blonde, flirty man. For a moment, he turned his eyes back Luffy, who watched the cook with her head tilted and a smile on her lips. Then, she turned back to him, meeting his eyes. She wore the outfit of a chore girl, her newly dictated role. At least, until she paid off the damages. And that's only if she didn't make more. Where the girl usually kept her scars uncovered, but the new outfit hid them well. He could tell it made her uncomfortable to have them hidden. During their talks she had briefly mentioned that they were a reminder of what she had to fight for. She had told him she never wanted to forget, so they would remain uncovered. Zoro. His attention was brought back to his captain. She stood near him, a pout on her lips as she stared at his food. Slowly, knowing she had his attention, she tore her eyes away to look at Zoro. His resolve crumbled beneath him instantly and he melted. Just like the first night in the boat, the cold, ex-pirate hunter melted. She had done it before, and he knew he let her get away with far too much because of it. With a roll of his eyes, he speared a bit of meat with his fork and lifted it to her mouth. She grinned at her clear win, and stepped forward to eat it. Then, the idiotic cook with the curly eyebrow butted in. "You must be Luffy-chan." Sanji waltzed up to them, a rose in his hand. Dramatically, he slipped onto one knee before Luffy and grasped her hand. He pulled it to his lips, kissing it and slipping the rose into her hands. He was oblivious to the glares he was receiving from the first mate. He saw Luffy's startled look and instantly grew protective. "I apologize for the old man's behavior. Making such a lovely young woman work. I have never seen such beauty." He was cut off as Luffy stumbled backwards. This shook Zoro from his protectiveness. Luffy had given Sanji her nakama eyes, and she had never acted like this to anyone. The embarrassed blush that spread across her cheeks was something completely new. Sanji had just kissed her. Instead of attempting to kick her. It took a moment to process, and then another to figure out why. Her blush deepened again. She was a girl, and beyond that, Sanji thought she was beautiful. There was something horribly wrong with that alone. There was no way she was beautifully. She looked nothing like Nami, Robin, Hancock or even Alvida after she ate that devil fruit. She didn't want to be beautiful. Her mouth dropped open in realization. "Oh my god," she muttered, before walking away from her friends. Zoro was smirking at the cook's failed attempt at smooth-talking the captain, and Usopp roared with laughter. In an attempt to get over the rejection, Sanji began to flirt with Nami. Luffy left the room quickly, and found herself staring at the waves. She didn't want to be pretty. Then again, did it really matter? She came here to save her nakama. No matter what form she was in, nothing changed her goal. She would have to get used to Sanji being flirty with her, but she was sure it was nothing she couldn't handle. Ayum appeared, leaning against the railing beside her. "You're taking it better than I expected," she hummed, looking at Luffy with something of a smile. "You might just take to this body better than I expected." Luffy looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" Ayum just shook her head. There was no way she was going to try and explain something to Luffy. He was still a man inside the body. She had to remember that. At least, that's how it was for now. There was no telling what the future held. "Luffy, are you alright?" Ayum looked up, and she seemed to freeze. She bit her lip, before forcing herself to disappear not a moment delayed. Luffy spun to see what she had been looking at and ended up bumping into Zoro. The two of them landed in a head on the deck. Zoro was beneath her, having been taken off guard by Luffy's sudden movement. She was straddling him unknowingly, looking down at him with a look of innocence. She grinned at him, forcing away his earlier insecurities. "Hi, Zoro," she exclaimed, then cocked her head when his face flushed. She watched his expression, confused, before looking down. When she did, she realized the position they were in and she jumped back. She helped her first mate to his feet, avoiding his eyes. Landing on Zoro that way, it was much more embarrassing than Sanji's kiss. Today was such an unlucky day, and she just knew it was going to get worse. She was right, of course, but that's what you get when you had already lived it once. Sure, there were slight differences that she wasn't exactly expecting, but they weren't necessarily bad. It was better than she thought, the little twists and turns. She was stronger now, so she didn't have to worry about things going wrong. She tried to look at details closer, something that was nearly impossible with her attention everywhere. But when Don Krieg arrived, shortly followed by Mihawk, Luffy knew she had to prepare herself for something she could not prevent. No matter what happened, what she saw, Zoro was not going to die. She was not going to lose him. She told herself this. Over and over, she repeated it like a mantra. She could do nothing but watch as Zoro stood up. He claimed, his words echoing through her ears, that a true swordsman never shows his back to the enemy, and Mihawk nodded in approval. Not going to die, she shouted to herself. The moment she saw the blood, she couldn't help it. She snapped. Zoro's blood was everywhere, and where in another life, he could defeat Mihawk with ease and become the greatest swordsman, as he had proven at her execution he had not reached that point. So easily, Mihawk could kill her swordsman. With a cry of anger, she blindly shot herself at Mihawk with a burst of haki. A fist flew from nothing, as she was moving too fast for anyone to track, and caught him square in the jaw. The force of it sent him flying into the wall of the ship. Everyone stared at her with wide, scared eyes. Not only had just punched a Shichibukai, she had sent him flying. The girl was practically feral, standing there with wide, angry and wild eyes. For a moment of time, she had no control over herself anymore. Seeing her Nakama's blood had driven her into insanity, only calmed by Luffy. At the sound of Zoro's voice, warm and alive, she snapped out of it. Her eyes faded of the anger, and she whipped around to see Zoro holding his sword high. I promise I won't ever lose again. I'll beat him someday. With Luffy's back turned from Mihawk, the warlord rose. He was looking at the girl. There was something not normal about her. All the same, she was powerful. He approached carefully, before putting his hand on Luffy's shoulder. She stiffened. Straw Hat, your fight is not with me, he told he. She relaxed beneath his grip. She knew Mihawk was not her challenge, but Zoro's. He would help Zoro become a great swordsman one day. He raised his voice, strive to surpass me, Roronoa Zoro. With that, he stepped onto his raft-like boat, and made to sail away. Did you not come to fight me? Don Krieg roared from another ship, seeming triumph and cocky now that Mihawk had so easily been beaten. No, I was just bored. Nay, Asen, if I defeat Don Krieg, will you let me off chore duty? Luffy asked Zeph. Zeph simply blinked in shock. After everything he had seen, she knew he could do it where he would fail. He had no choice but to put his faith in this girl who seemed powerful enough. She had sent a warlord flying, after all. Ah, yeah, of course, he muttered in complete defeat. She grinned. Okay. And with that, she practically bounded off towards the pirates. She landed on the deck, glaring at the crowd of pirate. Immediately, many backed off. They had seen what she did to the warlord. Challenging her would be madness. She did a complete sweep of the area, sending men flying in all directions into the water. Krieg already had his weapons out, dodging her attack but stumbling back. As she evened herself, steadying, she something pierced her shoulder. Blood rushed down her aim, and she scowled angrily. Without wincing, she yanked the metal missile out of her shoulder, bring a steady rush of blood with it. The cooks and pirates alike gaped at her. She hadn't even made a noise, had it even hurt at all. Luffy dropped the bloodied weapon, turning to face Krieg with a pissed-off expression. The man was smirking at her. He thought he could win. After all, she was just a girl, a stupid child. He obviously wasn't expecting the first hit to actually send him flying. He coughed as he rose from the wreckage, looking at the girl with a look akin to horror. One more move, and his armor shattered. He looked down, feeling himself grow scared. What kind of demon was this girl? She stepped back, laughing and watching him with a neutral expression. No one messes with Krieg. I'm going to kill you. To the surprise of many around her, the girl's eyes narrowed. Kill me. I've already died. She stumbled back, fearing her tone and her glare. She didn't step forward, pulling him to his feet and dragging him forward. She pulled her hand back, and ignoring how he quivered, let loose on him in a flurry of punches until her hand was bleeding and he fell to the ground, unconscious and bloody. She dropped him, nudging him aside with her food and made her way for the Barati. She boarded, ignoring the cooks and guests alike. All looked completely horrified by what they had just seen. This shrimp of a girl had just pummeled one of the most feared pirates. It was far too easy, a feat like that should have been impossible, and yet. This time she was stronger, more capable. She would fight and defend all of her Nakama, and she would save them. She passed the old man on her way to her cook. He had a bit of a shocked expression on his face. She looked at him apologetically, but it didn't stop her from wiping the blood from her hands onto her clothing. Sorry, Asen, I ruined the clothes. Ah, it's no problem. She smiled brightly as she approached Sanji, whose one visible eye was wide. Sanji, join my crew, okay. It took him a fair amount of convincing, but after the cook's shitty act, and him hearing the truth, Sanji had finally agreed to join Luffy. Or as he put it, join his most beautiful love for a life of adventure and romance on the sea. Luffy was still awkward with the flirting, even more so that it came from Sanji, but quickly got used to it. After all, she got first dibs on the food now. She watched with a small smile as Sanji gave his tearful goodbyes. Johnny, Usopp, and Zoro had stayed this time around, knowing well that the fight would not last all that long. Convincing Sanji, however, had taken a bit longer. Finally back on the sea and in her own clothes, Luffy was happy. The clothes that didn't cover her scars were more comfortable. She knew Sanji instantly saw the marks, but the man said nothing. Luffy rarely left Zoro's side, much to the other's chagrin. It didn't stop Sanji from flirting helplessly with her, even when Zoro would glare at him irritably from where he lay. I'm hungry, Sanji, Luffy said from beside Zoro with a pout. Almost instantly, dishes of food were laid out before her. Anything for you, my most beautiful captain. Sanji sang as she danced around her with hearts in his eyes. Yosaku and Johnny rolled their eyes in unison when Sanji simply dumped food in front of them. Usopp sputtered, but said nothing. Instead, he watched as Luffy stuffed her face for a few minutes, paused, and attempted to force food at Zoro. The man sat up indignantly, his face flaming as he insisted that he could at least eat. Luffy pouted, returning to shoving food down her throat. "I'll have you know, we are heading into a very dangerous situation." Yosaku started up, about halfway into their meal. He was cut off by Luffy, who scowled. "Fish man, Arlong, Nami evil, destroyed villages, 7 warlords, blah, blah, blah." She exclaimed, not heeding the warning looks anyone sent her. "Look, I'm strong enough to take this Arlong guy and get Nami back. I'll protect everyone." Sanji stepped forward, as if to say something about how wonderful his captain was, no matter what mood she was in. The darkened look in her eyes brought him to an abrupt stop. She was beyond upset, sitting there shaking and angry. No one was sure what to say, until Zoro reached around and looped an arm around Luffy. He tugged her closer, watching as she went from upset to shocked, to relaxed. "We know you'll keep us safe. Help me." Nami finally said the words she so desperately needed to hear. She watched as her nakama were beaten, pain coursing through her, but refused to fight. Until those words left Nami's mouth. "Take care of this for me, will you?" Luffy asked, pushing the straw hat onto Nami's head. She glanced at Zoro, Usopp and Sanji, who gave her nods. They followed as she left for Arlong Park, loyally trailing beside her. When they arrived, there was already a crowd standing by the doors. They were held off only by a beat-up Johnny and Yosaku, who parted willingly for her. Anyone could feel the pure, unmasked power that rolled off the woman in waves stronger than the ocean she spent her life on. The crowd split for her, not daring to get in the way of this infuriated pirate. She paused before the large doors, ignoring the villagers' insistence upon the door being unbreakable. She cracked her knuckles before sending one powerful punch towards the door. It crumbled immediately beneath her fingers. "Arlong, I'm going to make you pay." The villagers watched as the strange man approached the fish man. Anger shone bright in her eyes, and even he seemed taken aback by the power that rolled off of her. Still, she was too small, too weak, to do any real harm, right? He was taken completely off guard when she stood up to him, reached up, and snapped his nose. Not letting go, she pulled him down to her eye level. "You made my navigator cry," Luffy hissed venomously. She used her tight grip on Arlong's nose to hoist him over her shoulder, and with a growl, she slammed him into the pavement. Taken by surprise and perhaps even hurt, Arlong sat there for a moment. With a roar, the fishmen launched themselves at Luffy. Easily able to sense each attack, she dodged gracefully, sending counterattacks and sweeps. "Hey, save some for us," Sanju yelled, running into the battle to defend his wonderful captain from the dangers of vile fishmen. Zoro was already there, next to Luffy. His wounds bled more with each movement, but he pushed these thoughts aside. Right now, he was protecting his captain. "Well, you three can have them all," Usopp exclaimed as he ducked away from the action. For a good period of time, the fishmen seemed to be losing the battle without hope. The odds seemed to change, however, as Arlong rose to his feet once more and a large creature emerged from the depth of the water. The fishmen cheered obnoxiously. "Go Momu. Take these weak humans out." Luffy turned on her heel to face the large cow-like fish. She gave it a strict look and it instantly bowed her head submissively. Luffy smiled brightly and scratched its neck, much to the horror of the Arlong pirates. Many of them stumbled backwards, not believing the beast had been tamed by the pirate so easily. What, was she some type of witch? She turned around, the beast looming behind her, and released a powerful burst of haki. Around her, fishmen fell to the ground in heaps, without having even laid a finger upon them. Even so, it wasn't hard to see that everyone had felt it. Alongside Arlong, her nakama struggled to stand at the raw power. She managed to look apologetic, before she slumped onto the ground. Her body couldn't handle such large blasts of haki yet, untrained in this form. Luffy. Zoro was the first one to run forward, only to be stopped by Sanji, who gave him a small glare. "She'll be fine, Marimo. Did you not feel that, whatever it was? It just exhausted her. For now, we have our own fight." He indicated to the few fishmen who had withstood the power, although just about as shaky as them. Zoro nodded. Sanji was right, although he wouldn't have admitted it otherwise. He slipped into his stance, ignoring how he shook. It was only after he had defeated the fishman that he ran for Luffy's unconscious body. She seemed to be in a deep sleep as he approached and he couldn't help but roll his eyes. Of course she would be sleeping. He reached out, taking her shoulder and shaking it gently. She didn't even give an indication she felt it. He sighed in irritation. Luffy. He was cut off as he was abruptly kicked. He felt his old wounds as well as new split open at Arlong's kick. Arlong strode over, his eyes fiery with anger and vengeance. Zoro struggled to his feet, returning the look with deep hatred. Beating Hachi had been one thing, but Arlong. There was no way Zoro could live up to his promise to Luffy. Arlong caught him by the throat, lifting him high. Zoro instinctively raised his hands to his throat, clutching at the webbed fingers. Arlong ripped away the first layer of clothing, finding himself rather amazed at the sight of the injuries. Large cuts from both Mihawk and Hachi were etched deeply into his skin. "How did you survive with such injuries?" Arlong asked. Zoro just glared, feeling himself becoming wheezy. Behind Arlong, he could see Nami raise her hand to her mouth in open horror from his wounds. I will be the best, Zoro coughed, in answer to Arlong's question. I won't lose. Ever. What dedication, Arlong mocked with a scowl. He didn't understand how the puny humans continued to fight, even after their leader collapsed in a moment of weakness. He himself would never fall so easily, so pitifully. Your captain is weak. Zoro's eyes sparked with anger at the words. Luffy is not weak. She is strong where you are not. She is strong in ways you wouldn't even begin to understand. Arlong just rolled his eyes at Zoro's words. They were pitiful, just like the band of pirates. They had no chance of succeeding with their dreams, after all. With their captain down for the count, they were nothing. Perhaps I should kill her first, and you can see just how strong your captain is. Kill me. Luffy's voice floated over from behind Arlong. She had stood up from where she'd passed out, stretching her rubbery limbs over her head with a yawn. Perhaps she should join Zoro as he trained. This body needed to be more capable of controlling it. It'd gladly let you try. But if you lay a single webbed finger on Zoro, I won't be the loser of this fight. Arlong practically shook in anger. He dropped Zoro to the ground, watching her with a horrified expression on his face. He wasn't sure he could handle another blast of power again, if it was as powerful as before. Still, he wouldn't go down without a fight. Not to a female human, so small and weak compared to him. Luffy walked past him, ignoring how he tensed, and scooped Zoro into her arms. She could smell the blood that soaked his clothes as she walked towards the group of villagers. She lied to herself, telling herself the blood belonged to someone else, but it didn't help. This was his blood, and someone had caused it. She placed him at Nami's feet, looking up at Nami for assurance that he would be safe. The navigator gave a soft nod, watching as Luffy smiled at her before turning and striding back to Arlong. She couldn't have any of her nakama nearby. They needed to be somewhere safe, no matter what. Arlong Park was coming down. Boss, you're finally here, Nami exclaimed as the woman seemed to drop from the heavens in of luck. The girl looked out of it for a moment, before turning to the orange-haired girl who had addressed her. Nami, Luffy had said without thinking. Nami wasn't expecting that, but flowed with it easily enough. Would you take care of these guys for me, boss? Nami asked, before taking off down the streets. She couldn't help but feel the guilt course through her for leaving the girl alone. She didn't know if the girl could handle herself. What if the men tried to do something? She found herself turning around, only to come face to face with the strange, straw hat-wearing captain. You beat them. You must be pretty strong. Nami acknowledged with a pretty wide grin. She looked the girl before her from top to bottom. She was dressed in nothing but a tank top and shorts, but it seemed to work for the childlike girl. You're pretty strong. Why don't you join up with me? I'm a thief that only steals from pirates. Nami said, still having no idea about who the girl was. No, Luffy said bluntly, not even attempting to soften the outright rejection. But how about joining my pirate crew? No way in hell. Luffy woke up hours later in a medical bed. Hockey was second nature to her in a way she couldn't help but use it, but she had overexerted in her anger towards Arlong. Her body was left exhausted and weak. When she woke, however, she was in the cot directly across from Zoro, who seemed to be napping. You're awake. Luffy rolled over to see Nami grinning at her. She smiled back brightly, just happy to see two of her nakama at her side as she woke up. Luffy sat up slightly, and Nami placed the straw hat back on her head with utmost care. The woman had taken care of it in Zoro, just as promised. Suddenly, Luffy was pulled into a tight hug. Luffy didn't hesitate to wrap her rubbery limbs around Nami as she returned the hug. She could feel Nami shaking with silent tears, just as she had only mere hours ago. Thank you, Nami whispered, but Luffy heard. Thank you so much, for what you've done. Luffy just grinned, laughed, and pulled away from Nami. Let's go eat, okay? Luffy exclaimed, her tone one of complete forgiveness and even happiness. She instantly grabbed Nami's hand, pulling her towards the door. Nami chuckled and followed her captain. Her captain. She never thought she would say those words with fondness. Not after Arlong and everything he had done to her, at least. But there was something about this girl. Perhaps it was the way she smiled when she listened to Usopp's woven tales and songs of triumph, or watched Sanji flirt with girls. Maybe it was the way she watched Zoro drink, the way she kept her eyes on all of her nakama. This woman, this captain. She cared about her friends in a way Nami had never seen outside her family. To Luffy, her crew was her family. And she had thought she would have lost it. After everything she had done, how she had treated them, why would they ever want her back? But she was accepted warmly by the captain, by the crew. She had found family again, after so long of being alone. And for the first time in years, she was happy. After partying for a good few hours and stuffing her face on whatever the villagers fed her, Luffy had eventually wandered back to the little medical building she had woken up in. Zoro was sitting awake this time, swearing loudly as the doctor changed the bandages. Zoro had been fixed up immediately upon seeing how bad it had been, but he was still being checked up on regularly. When Luffy entered, however, he quickly turned on her. You, where the hell did you go? The doctor scolded, but Luffy didn't listen to what he said. She had just been tired, and he had nothing to worry about. "Hey Zoro," she exclaimed, dropping down onto the foot of the bed. The doctor sputtered indignantly at the two of them before jumping to his feet and marching away. "What are you doing here?" he asked, only to receive a shrug in reply. "Did you eat all the food already?" Luffy wanted to playfully punch him but she held back. He was hurt, after all. "No, I'm just bored," she sighed, crossing her legs as she watched him. Sanji was flirting with all the girls, Nami was talking to Genzo and Nojiko, and Usopp was still singing to his fans who believed he defeated Arlong. She let out a huff of air. "Everyone else is really busy." "I see." Luffy nodded very seriously in response to his understanding. "I talked to that Genzo guy, and Nami is gonna come with us," Luffy explained, enthusiasm leaking into her tone without meaning to. Zoro smiled at the captain. "That's good." He still didn't trust the witch. He couldn't be expected to, after everything she had done to the crew. She was more trouble than she was worth. Either way, Luffy seemed to trust her and respect her, so he left it alone. Luffy seemed pleased with his approval, so it couldn't be such a bad thing. "How are you feeling from earlier?" Luffy shrugged. She wouldn't admit it, but she was still a little tired. She didn't have to say anything though, and Zoro tugged her down to his level. He shifted in the cot, but it didn't seem to matter. The captain had fallen asleep almost immediately, curling into his side. The partying, drinking and food could wait. Right now, it was just the two of them, just as it had been for many days before Nami had wormed her way into the crew. He let his eyes fall shut and joined her in the world of sleep. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Once in a Lifetime by Alcoholic Introvert. Chapter 4, A Stranger's Memories. The nightmares were a common occurrence. At first, they hadn't really been a problem. Not that Zoro remembered at least. During their first few days together, she never seemed to have a problem sleeping. The boat had been small then, and he often woke up to her curled against him if not anything. When Nami had joined, she had offered her, but not Zoro, a place on the bigger boat. Luffy had tried sleeping there, but found herself near Zoro again. After Usopp joined, and they got the going merry, the nightmares started. The first few nights, she had wandered around the deck. No matter who was on watch, she would always be out there. Many of the nights seemed to be sleepless, but come day, she was the usual ball of energy so they didn't worry. Other nights, members of the crew would wake up with her curled up near to them. Nami had woken up a few times with the girl sleeping next to her in the one bed. She had shrugged it off. Usopp only had it happen once or twice. After Sanji joined, it had happened with the flirty man too. Most of these nights, however, it was Zoro who ended up tangled with the girl in the tiny hammocks. Sometimes, she would sleep out on the deck when he was on watch, curled against him or close to him. Less and less nights were spent wandering around sleeplessly, but there were also nights she was forced into her own hammock. It was one of these nights when the true night terrors began. They had been subtle before. She would shake, or whimper in her sleep. It was solved easily by curling closer to her current target. These were different from the simple nightmares. The first time she had a night terror, she had awoken the whole ship with a loud, keening scream. In the darkness, the men had scrambled from their quarters to the women's, where Nami was already standing by the hammock, looking horrified. She was clueless at what to do. Hesitantly, she reached out and shook Luffy awake. Even when she had the nightmares, waking her up would knock her out of this. This time, however, her eyes flew open and she looked around wildly. Her eyes were filled with a fear they had never seen in their captain. "Luffy, are you alright?" Usopp asked, stepping forward. Luffy's eyes widened and she shook her head wildly. She attempted to back away, but only managed to fall from her hammock. This only made them even more worried. She had never reacted like this, ever. Let alone to her nakama talking to her. "No, no, no, no," Luffy repeated over and over to herself. She looked on the verge of tears as she sat up, flattening herself against the wall as she panicked. "Luffy-chan, are you?" Sanji was cut off by another blood-curdling scream from the captain. "Dead," she mumbled, followed by a string of words they couldn't make out. She curled into herself and stared at her hands as through they were covered in blood. In her mind, they were. Everything was. Including the 4 people in front of her. She had lost them again, but she lived. It wasn't fair. Ayum had broken her promise. Too much blood, dead. Zoro reached forward and grabbed Luffy. The captain wailed and struggled, trying to get out of the suffocating grasp of an angry dead man. Zoro didn't let go, but his eyes narrowed on his captain. "Luffy," he said, his voice stern. She didn't listen. "Shut the hell up. How could you be so insensitive?" Nami cried, and Sanji kicked Zoro over the back of the head with an indignant shout. Luffy-chan must be so terrified of something right now. They had failed to notice that Luffy had stopped struggling slightly at Zoro's words. Just the sound of his voice, despite its roughness, had soothed her. Zoro ignored the others and continued to direct his words to the young captain. "I won't follow a captain who gives into weaknesses like this," he growled, his grip on her wrist tightening, but not extremely roughly. We're here, and we're alive, so stop acting like we're not. And you're our captain. Are you really going to give in to a bad dream? We are putting our faith in you. For as long as you're alive, you are responsible for your crew, for our lives. We're alive, Luffy. Without really realizing or caring, Zoro lifted her wrist and guided it towards his chest. Her fingers were cold, even through his shirt. In mere moments, she began to relax as the beat of Zoro's heart soothed her. He urged Nami forward, repeating the motion with her, and then Usopp and Sanji. The fact she felt her nakama so close and alive calmed her, and she slowly fell back into a peaceful slumber. Zoro picked her up, and she instantly curled into his touch. Nami signaled to lay her on the bed, and he did. He sincerely hoped she wouldn't remember anything tomorrow. Hell, he hoped no one would remember what had happened. She's seen a lot of pain, hasn't she? Sanji asked after a moment of silence in which Luffy refused to let go of Zoro's arm. The others agreed with silent nods. Probably lost someone really important to her, Usopp said, remembering the nightmare he had after his mother passed away. Nami winced slightly at this and bit her lip. She was in a similar boat, although the memories still haunted her daily life. At least she had her mic and trees, the one small reminder. Luffy, well, she just didn't know. I'll finish watch for the night. There's no way I can sleep after that. Zoro, you should stay with her, Nami said after a moment, sparing them a glance before moving to leave. The others filed out shortly after, leaving Zoro alone with the captain. He didn't mind. He probably took a lot more pride in being her comfort zone than he showed, but that didn't mean he wasn't honest with what he said. He knew she was strong, and it was painful to see her give into something like nightmares. If only he could understand exactly what was happening with her. It happened rather quickly, her appearance. One moment, it had been just the two of them in the room, and the next, a chill had set over the room and Zoro's hand hovered over Wado Ikimonji. The footsteps were unheard, if there were any. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand reaching to Luffy's cheek and resting on it softly. Luffy tensed beneath the touch, but did not panic. Zoro regarded the newcomer in silence, his hand now tight on the handle of his sword. She didn't seem to mean any harm, but one wrong move. Where had she come from, anyway? Zoro. The words slipped from her lips, a distinct fondness coating them, similar to the way Luffy spoke. Who are you? Not an enemy. You expect me to believe that? Not really, but I tried. Ayum leant back, a laugh escaping her. Luffy will explain when she deems it important. For now, trust your captain, won't you? Zoro's eyes turned back to his snoozing captain. He trusted her with his life, with his dream, but he did not trust this woman. Why should he? She had appeared from nothing and refused to explain herself. So why are you here? Ayum glanced at Luffy, and then back to Zoro. I don't want you getting attached. Luffy is special. She'll only end up hurt if you or anyone gets attached, Zoro. Zoro released Wado Ikimonji, looking at Ayum in curiosity instead. What are you saying? Ayum gave a huff of air. You know exactly what I'm saying, Zoro. This girl has seen things neither you or me could fathom, knows pain you have never felt. She is still living the nightmare of her past, and her future. When the time comes, she will explain this to you and the crew. For now, just don't grow too attached. She was gone before Zoro could fit another word in. After many moments of sitting in silence, he finally moved to lay down next to Luffy. The girl smiled in her sleep and curled against him. Not get attached. To Luffy. That was impossible. Although, perhaps, he was a little more attached than a first mate should be. Luffy let out a victory cheer. Nearby, her crew members crowded together to stare at the piece of paper in amazement. On the front of the paper, the girl smiled widely at them. The face was familiar, nothing new, but the number beneath. 45 million berries. Nami gaped in awe. Luffy just threw her head back and laughed. She had expected her bounty to stay the same, but this was something new and different. Perhaps it had something to do with how easily she had wiped out the most dangerous criminals in the East Blue. It was beyond fun too, seeing her nakama's reactions. They hadn't expected such a high bounty, despite seeing her strength. Zoro grinned and hit her back affectionately. Good job, Luffy, he complimented. Luffy positively beamed under his direct praise. Luffy-chan is so beautiful when she smiles. Sanji exclaimed as he danced around. He had ripped the bounty page from Nami's hand and held it to his chest as he danced around. We can hang this in the kitchen. Nami rolled her eyes, grabbing the paper back. Do you not realize that she is now a wanted woman? We are, from this point on, in far more danger. Ah, Nami's so beautiful when she's worried. Guys, there's an island straight ahead. Usopp called, stepping into the conversation and effectively stopping Nami from beating Sanji. It managed to get everyone's attention. Luffy wasted no time running for the figurehead, plopping herself down on it. That's Logatown. It will be our last stop before heading to the Grand Line, Nami told them. Luffy crossed her legs up on the figurehead, staring at the island with a look of deep concentration. That's where Gall D. Rogers was born and killed, she said softly, in a rare streak of knowledge that took them by surprise. One of her hands came up subconsciously to her shoulder, tracing the pink scar. She too had been brought back to her hometown for her execution. It had been a quiet event, perhaps to avoid the drama Ace's execution had caused. Still, Hinakama had showed up and died for her. Yeah, actually, Nami said. She quickly shook off the shock from the fact Luffy actually knowing something. Luffy nodded, settling on the figurehead with a neutral look on her face. Did she want to go stand on top of it again? It no longer held the same appeal. Ace's father had died upon one. Ace had almost followed suit. Luffy himself had sat upon his own execution platform. Would it be different this time? She took a deep breath. She wouldn't return to the platform. Zoro, let's go get you new swords, okay? Luffy said, bounding forward with a happy smile on her face and latching onto her first mate. Nami, we need money. Nami reluctantly handed over the cash they would need, ranting about how much Zoro would owe her. She casually slipped in that if Luffy came shopping for clothes with her, she would lift some of the debt, but Luffy was having none of that. She was perfectly satisfied with what she wore and had her mind set on going with Zoro. As soon as they were docked, everyone took off their own ways. Luffy followed Zoro to the sword shop. It had taken them at least an hour, since neither of them had a particularly good sense of direction. Luffy stayed close to Zoro, though her attention was everywhere. During her search for the platform, she had gotten a good view of the city. She hadn't really paid attention to the details, though, and now she basked in the city. Well, more accurately, the various vendors that lined the streets. Oh, Zoro, Zoro, she would call, pointing at a vendor selling meat on a stick. The next moment she would be pointing at some selling something else. She occasionally bought food, and sometimes Zoro had to practically drag her away, grumbling under his breath the whole time. Along the way, they had met a young woman who beat up some pirates. Luffy watched with amusement, and then laughed when the pirates went running. Luffy knew she recognized the woman, but couldn't quite place a finger on it. When the girl lost her balance and stumbled over, Luffy helped her to her feet and retrieved her glasses. The woman thanked her, blushing profusely before running off. Luffy laughed until she was pulled away by Zoro. A few streets down, they reached a quiet little shop. Luffy was looking at swords. The sight was hilarious, at least to Zoro. The girl knew next to nothing about swords. But it caused him to crack a smile, even as she whined about the overpriced swords. He shook his head, scolding himself for getting distracted yet again. Hey, Asen, Luffy called after pouting for a few minutes. What can we get with 100,000 berry? The man muttered bitterly under his breath. Amateurs. Stupid kids. Probably can't even hold a sword. Zoro heard the insult but chose to ignore it. Luffy, on the other hand, turned to the man with her hands on her hips. What did you say, old man? Oi, Luffy. He's gonna be the greatest swordsman the world has ever seen, now sell us swords, you bastard. Zoro tried uselessly to rein in his captain. He couldn't deny that the words made him happy, to hear how much faith she had in him, but they were unnecessary. He didn't expect much from the shopkeeper after that, but at least they weren't kicked out. Zoro knew something bad was coming when the man's eyes suddenly lit up, though. May I see your sword? Zoro's eyebrows rose, but he hesitantly removed his sword from the sheath and held it before him for the man to observe. I'll buy this from you for 200,000, and you could buy 3 decent swords, the man offered in fake generosity. Zoro stiffened, grasping the sword tightly. Sell this sword. It was as precious to him as Luffy's straw hat was to her. She seemed to notice him tense in their exchange, and frowned at the two of them. I'm not selling it. 250. No. 300. No. 900. Asen. He isn't selling the sword, so stop trying. Luffy intercepted, slamming her hands down on the table with a huff. The man turned to glare at Zoro. Tell your girlfriend to stay out of business and in her place. The result was instantaneous. Girlfriend. In her place. They both sent the shopkeeper a glare so dark, he stumbled backwards in fear. To only add to the situation, the door chimed behind them and his worst customer stormed in. Luffy grinned hugely when she turned and was greeted by the sight of the woman she had helped earlier. Hello. Luffy greeted with an overly friendly wave. The woman looked shocked for a moment before smiling and waving back. Hello. I've just come to pick up my shigure, she said, and then noticed the sword Zoro held protectively. Her eyes lit up, as though she were a child that had been showered in sweets. Is that Wado Ikimonji? Luffy observed the scene with amusement. It was entertaining to see Zoro look so extremely confused. The woman leapt forward, stopping herself before she let herself get carried away. Yes, this is definitely Wado Ikimonji. It's worth more than 20 million berry. She looked at the sword with admiration, and a slight jealousy. Please don't tell me you're selling it to this man. You are ruining my business. The owner screeched, and Luffy laughed in response. He wasn't going to sell it no matter what, Asen, Luffy pointed out, and the shopkeeper scowled at her. Zoro, having quite enough of it, slid the sword back into his sheath. You can pick any 2 of those, his voice was bitter as he pointed at the barrels. He disappeared for a moment, fetching shigure for Tashigi. She took it with a flustered, thank you, before he snapped at her to leave. She didn't. She stayed, watching Luffy and Zoro as they picked through the barrel. Luffy seemed to be looking for something besides a good sword, as if she had a specific one in mind. Zoro shuffled through the barrel next to her. You must really like swords to carry 3 of them. Tashigi gushed. You remind me of that pirate hunter. Roronoa Zoro. Have you heard of him? I hear that name a lot. Zoro smirked. There was a crash, and they both turned to see Luffy had crashing the barrel of swords down. Swords were everywhere, and Zoro gave an irritated sigh. But he did nothing, just rolled his eyes and turned back to Tashigi. What about him? He's an evil man, Tashigi explained. He uses his swords for evil. Many say he holds 3 of the rarest swords. All the bad people have swords. It's just not fair. The swords are crying. Zoro opened his mouth to reply, but there was a cheer from Luffy before he got the chance. He turned to her, and she looked at him with bright eyes. Zoro, I found it. She cheered, holding out a sword with a blood-red sheath. Tashigi seemed to forget what she was saying and launched herself forward. Whoa, you should get this sword, sir. Sandai Kidetsu III is an amazing sword. Tashigi gasped as she admired the sword. I won't sell it. It's a death wish, and I will not be held liable for that. The shop owner said, torn between fear and wanting to make a sale. Zoro's smirk only grew at the words, and he took the sword from Luffy's hand. Who knew his captain could pick out swords? It's cursed, he said, feeling the power run through it. He withdrew it from its sheath, admiring the blade. Oh, I'm sorry. Tashigi apologized. Zoro didn't care. I'll take it, Zoro insisted, much to everyone's shock and horror. Except Luffy, of course, who was now searching for his other sword. Yubashiri. Luffy couldn't remember quite how it looked, but maybe. But it's cursed. I won't be held responsible for your death. The owner stuttered uselessly over his words. Well, I'll just have to test my luck against this curse. Without waiting for a reply, he set the sheath aside and threw the sword into the air. As it came down, spinning wildly, Zoro stuck out his arm. Luffy even paused in her sword search to watch Zoro. Her breath caught in her throat as the blade came down, and then left her as it passed without leaving a scratch. Amazing. Tashigi fell to her knees. It was just amazing. This swordsman was something else, someone who truly deserved to carry the swords. The owner must have been thinking the same thing as he disappeared and returned with the best sword his shop had to offer. He insisted they take them both, free of charge. Luffy grinned as the second sword was added to Zoro's collection, before thanking the old man. K, you got your swords, now we get to go get food, K Zoro. Luffy said, dragging Zoro out the doors. Tashigi stared out the door after the two, still in shock from what she had just seen. After a few moments, it finally seemed to sink in. Roronoa Zoro. She didn't even care that they were unbelievably lost. Because of it, they got to wander around and try all the different foods. Zoro, who now had extra money due to the free swords, occasionally bought them food. Eventually, they ended up at the harbor. It was just like before. Smoker stood with a group of Marines, casually talking. It was hard to believe that this was the same guy that had hunted her to the end. This was the same man that had brought her to her execution. She didn't blame him, wasn't angry at him. He was doing his job, just as her grandfather had been doing when he hunted Roger. What happened after she was handed over hadn't been his doing either, but she still feared him. But she didn't fear him now. Now she could fight him easily. She had hockey and experience on her side, and he was the same level as when they had first met. The fight wouldn't even be fair this time around. Nay, Asen, she called, gripping Zoro's arm tightly. The Marine turned to her, sweeping her from head to toe. He had never seen her before. She rocked on her heels, trying to not appear nervous. Is there a store that sells compass nearby? It's a gift for a friend. He paused, before pointing down a random street. There's one down that street, near the execution platform. Follow the smoke. She did as Smoker asked, dragging along a very confused Zoro. She found herself in the town square, but she merely glanced at the execution before pulling them over to the small shop that Smoker had directed her to. Inside, there was everything from maps, the equipment needed, as well as a bunch of compass. It wasn't hard to find a large selection of log poses near the door. We need one of these for the Grand Line, Luffy said with a laugh. Since they don't use regular compass. Zoro paused. He was actually impressed with the captain for knowing that much. She never seemed the type to research before jumping into it. Can I help you? They both turned to the man behind the counter, who greeted them with a bright smile. Luffy nodded. I want a log pose. We're heading for the Grand Line. Pirates. The man questioned, and despite Zoro's nudge, she nodded enthusiastically. I'm gonna be Pirate King, she said, receiving an odd look from the shopkeeper, who brushed it off soon after and burst into laughter. Well, good luck getting out of this town with Smoker watching the area, the man said, complete faith in the Marine. Luffy just laughed. Will you still sell us the log pose now that you know we're pirates? Luffy asked, tilting her head in curiosity. The man shrugged. Business is business, he said. Zoro glanced between his laughing captain and the man. As long as you have money, our lips are sealed. Zoro and Luffy walked away with her prize, the log pose attached securely to the swordsman's wrist. Luffy decided that if it was on hers, it would be broken within minutes, so she entrusted it to her swordsman as they headed back to the Going Merry. It had begun to drizzle, so Nami surely wanted them back soon. "Don't break it, Zoro," she said for what had to be the third time. She was met by a glare from her swordsman. "Yes, Luffy, I know," he said, swearing that if she said it one more time he might strangle her, or even break the stupid thing. "You don't need to. Luffy-chan." Luffy turned with a huge smile to see Sanji running towards. He reached them quickly, much to Zoro's displeasure. "Did you get lots of food, Sanji?" "Of course. I got plenty for you, my captain." Sanji sang, and Luffy's grin grew. "Zoro and I went shopping too," Luffy said excitedly. "We got swords, and lots of food. Nothing as good as yours, but—" Straw Hat Luffy. She broke off when she heard her name, and both of the men with her turned to look at the source. Smoker was standing there, smoke seeping from his being. Her eyes narrowed on him, and she took a step back. "So you were the pirate," he said after a moment of observing her. She stared back, a frown on her lips. She knew she wouldn't be caught, not today, but she wouldn't forget that she had been. "You don't look worth 45 million berry." He sounded almost disappointed, as if he had expected more from the girl. Then again, he had been disappointed the first time, and she didn't even use hockey back then. The smoke came billowing out towards her, wrapping around her tightly. "Zoro, Sanji, go back to the ship now. I'll meet you there," she yelled through the smoke. She was met by stubborn resistance. Of course they wouldn't leave their captain like this. Using hockey and pushing his grip away, she escaped the smoke, only to see Sanji and Zoro standing there, ready for battle. "I said." She was cut off as Smoker managed to pin her down, the sea stone at the end of his weapon proving useful. She was trapped beneath it, and sent a weak punch at Smoker as she felt her energy draining. That didn't mean she wouldn't fight, though. She wriggled beneath his grip as Smoker seized Sanji and Zoro in the smoke. She sent another punch at him, this one taking him off guard and sending him stumbling off of her. By this point, it was raining fairly hard on them, and lightning flashed through the sky. She lifted her fist to attack again, hoping to keep him at bay long enough for them to escape, when a shadow appeared behind Smoker. Smoker lifted his arm, ready to attack, and the man grabbed it. Smoker seemed frozen by it. "He saw you off in Logatown." Luffy's mouth dropped open. This was her father, the one that still hadn't appeared to her. This was Dad. The word that was barely heard over the pounding thunder and angry rain did not belong to Luffy. But then, neither did any of the images that suddenly flashed through her mind. "I wanna be like you one day, Dad." The small child giggled, grabbing at the man's leg and looking up at him in awe. "You're so cool." The man, Dragon, smiled fondly back at his daughter, reaching out and ruffling her hair. "One day, Luffy. XXX. What you mean I have to stay with Gramps?" Luffy gasped, looking up at her father with a look of absolute horror. "I don't want to. It's just for the summer. He'll kill me. Consider it training. XXX. How could you be so reckless? You could have died." "It's okay, Shanks was there." "What if he wasn't, Luffy? I thought you would know better." XXX. Red-haired Shanks. The name sounded familiar, but he didn't know where he had heard it before. "He's a pirate, right?" "Yeah, I want to be a pirate too." "I thought you wanted to be a revolutionary." "I changed my mind." XXX. "Sorry, Dad, I want to stay on Fuchsia. I promise I'll train hard, I'll make you proud." "You haven't even started training your hockey yet." "I can do it, Dad. I can't leave now." "No." Luffy broke from her thoughts with a yell. Tears were pouring down her face, but they were not hers. Whatever voice had echoed out of her before was silenced in her angry outburst. Those were not her thoughts, her memories, and Luffy wanted nothing to do with them. "Luffy." Three of the men echoed, eyes narrowed on her. She winced upon hearing Dragon's voice. It was familiar, she wanted to go to him, but at the same, he was a stranger to her, right? "Let's go," she muttered, nodding quickly at Dragon before taking off with Sanji and Zoro. Dragon watched his daughters retreating back with a frown. There was something off about her that he couldn't place. "Who was that man, Luffy?" Zoro asked as they neared the ship. Luffy looked at her first mate, seeming almost lost. "That was my dad." As soon as Luffy was on the ship, she made the order to leave. Everyone instantly dived into a frenzy, rushing about to get going. Nami had already done most of the work, and as soon as they were gone, Luffy had disappeared from the deck. She locked herself in the women's quarters, frustration running through her. What the hell is going on? She yelled at no one in particular. She couldn't make sense of it. The memories weren't hers, where had they came from? Ayume. Ayume appeared, her almost solid form shimmering in front of Luffy. "What do you want?" Luffy glared at her, a terrifying sight. She felt tears of frustration prick at her eyes, and was silent as she took a deep breath. If those memories weren't hers, and yet she felt them and saw them as though she had lived them. It was horrifying to think, but, well, Luffy, there's another soul in this body, isn't there? It's not just me. Ayum glanced at her, smirked, and then confirmed her words with a nod. Technically, it is you. It's your soul from this world, the woman who owned your body before you came along. Luffy was shaking, both angry and hurt. I'm in her body. Ayum gave an annoyed huff. Did you expect me to find an empty shell running around? Yes, she is you. She is in there. You see, Luffy, when you made the agreement, I had to find a universe that was as similar to yours as possible. Time travel was preferable, I suppose, but since you already existed in the other universe, fighting yourself, it doesn't work very well. Lu, here, though, she's something else. The universe here is different, although it has the same people. It went completely over the captain's head, and Ayum sighed. There was no way to put it into words the girl would understand. Both Luffys are inside you. As time passes, you will merge with her, or wipe her existence altogether. I figured your willpower alone would crush her, but it seems I was mistaken. Merging might be a bit painful for both of you, since you will be forced to endure her memories, but with each trigger, you will slowly become the same person. So, when you saw Dragon earlier, Luffy reacted inside of you. She seems to have an emotional attachment to your father. Why? Luffy didn't like this at all. This wasn't freedom. There had been a soul here, before him. She had her own memories, her own life, and her own future. And he had taken that away. Beyond that, they were merging. He was absorbing what she had left of her existence. It was the only way to save them, Luffy. Universes are closely linked. While things do change, one universe's happenings can directly affect another universe. Since all universes run on the same timeline, all happening at once but with the smallest alterations. Luffy looked blankly at Ayum, a frown on her face as the rusty gears in her mind turned. Look, I wish it could be as simple as sending you back in time, but it's not. Because of whatever happened in another universe, your Nakama will die in yours. However, what you did in your universe can change everything in this one. Luffy-chan, food is ready whenever you are, my dearest captain. Ayum was already gone, and Luffy grudgingly climbed to her feet. For the rest of the night, she seemed to lack her usual enthusiasm. Did you come to fight me? I never thought I'd see the day. Shanks' face was flushed deeply, and it was obvious he'd been drinking. Mihawk just stared, shaking his head slowly. I have no desire to fight a helpless one-armed man. It was the closest he'd get to a joke, and Shanks lit up immediately. And here I thought I'd have some entertainment, Shanks whined. Mihawk just rolled his eyes, settling down before Shanks comfortably. It was then that Shanks noticed the damages his friend had, a line of bruises covering his jaw. What the hell happened to you? This, Mihawk said, holding out a piece of folded paper. Shanks looked confused for a moment, before accepting the paper and unfolding it. He recognized the smiling face immediately. It reminded me of that girl you were going on about, the revolutionary's daughter. It was indeed her, though much had changed since he had seen the small child. For one, she wasn't much of a child anymore. It was only a few years after the Roger Pirates had disbanded. Shanks had, like many in the crew, returned to his hometown to start his life over. From there, he had gained some new Nakama. With them, he had conquered the East Blue. There was one town that they always returned to. The people had always treated them well, despite their pirate status. Many of the villagers had gone so far as to grow fond of the pirates. Among them, a young girl had taken a special interest in the pirates. The first time she had met them, she had been anything but shy. She had quickly made herself noticed, boldly approaching them in a bar. Apparently she had been sitting and talking quietly with the barmaid, Makino. When she had heard them talking, however, she quickly introduced herself. She soon grew interested in the idea of being a pirate and seemed intent on talking to Shanks about it. Soon after, though, she was urged out of the building by Makino, who insisted it was getting dark and she had to return to home. After she had left, Shanks had turned to the barmaid he had come to befriend, questioning her about the girl. No one really knows much about Luffy-chan, Makino explained as she passed over another bottle of sake. She spends the summer here with her grandpa, although he's rarely here himself. The rest of the time, she's gone who knows where. For the time he spent in Fushia, the girl would not stop following the pirates around. It wasn't just Shanks either. She would attach herself to anyone who would talk to her, excitedly listen to their stories, and help them however she could. About 4 days before they left, she disappeared without any warning. Shanks had been unsure, before remembering what Makino had said. Their next 2 visits to the village, there was no sign of the girl. However, when summer rolled around again, the girl reappeared. She had changed a surprising amount in the last year. The beginnings of what would one day be lean muscle could be seen in her arms and rubbery limbs, an accident that had happened a few days before she disappeared last year. That had been a crazy year. She had been training. Her appearances in the town were less and less, her grandfather seeming keen on wanting to keep her away from the pirates. Shanks got to know the little girl a bit more and she began to open up. She would often chat about her time away from the village. Apparently, her father raised her. She spent the summers with her grandpa. She wanted to be a pirate. Because of him, It was odd how easily he could converse with she who was nothing more than a child. My dad wants to meet you, she mentioned offhandedly one day as the crew was stocking their ship and preparing to leave. Since you saved me. The one-armed man glanced up in curiosity, his crew behind him sharing similar expressions. Doesn't your dad like the whole secrecy thing? Luffy shrugged. He says he wants to meet the person who's turning his daughter into a pirate. Now, Shanks stated, holding his one arm up in mock surrender. That's a choice you made on your own. He can't give me hell for that. When's your old man going to show up? Againa, Luffy lifted and dropped her shoulders. Her dad was unpredictable. Sometime today. I've been here for almost 5 weeks. Luffy had been pretty close with her assumption, and despite being called off by Makino to return to her grandpa, she promised to return to see them off. She did return, just hours before they planned to set sail for good. Beside her, a tall man in a green robe walked solemnly. In one hand, she reached for and held his, and in the other, she clutched a small bag that must have held her few belongings she traveled with. Upon seeing Shanks, however, she dropped both of them and bolted for the pirates. Shanks, my dad's here. The man leant over to retrieve her bag, but quickly straightened. His hood fell back, revealing his face to them. Half of his face was covered in tattoos, and dark hair fell in a mop over his head. His spirit burned in a way so similar to Luffy's, no one could doubt their relation. He joined them on the docks, watching everyone apprehensively. You're the one turning my daughter into a pirate? He asked, after a long moment of drawing silence. Many of the men on Shanks' ship had drawn back, sensing the man's strength was as powerful as his spirit. This was a dangerous man, no doubt. Not just any pirate, Dad. I'm going to be queen of the pirates, Luffy insisted as she looked up at the two men from between them. You'll have to fight me for that crown, Lu, Shanks said, reaching and ruffling her hair. She grinned proudly. Dragon watched the interaction between them fondly. Don't worry, Shanks. When I beat you, I'll let you marry me and then you can be king. Then you don't even have to fight, either. Luffy laughed, poking her tongue out at Shanks, who burst into laughter he wasn't able to hide. There will be a fight, but I don't think it'll be the crown thereafter. Lu's gonna be a heartbreaker, one of the crew members chimed in, resulting in a ringing laughter. Luffy rolled her eyes. There was no way that was true. Guys were still icky, and always would be. Except for Shanks, probably. Dragon laughed, and brought the attention back to the father. He seemed to be taking the, my daughter wants to run off and become a criminal, thing fairly well. You've corrupted my daughter, red hair, Dragon said with raised eyebrows. Shanks just grinned back, fearless compared to some on his crew. Then, Dragon shrugged. It couldn't really be helped now, could it? Shanks was still laughing over Luffy's earlier comment, much to the girl's chagrin. Shanks, that's not very nice. Sorry Luffy. You're still laughing. You're not sorry at all. Here, take my hat. You can take care of it until you become the pirate queen, okay? It'll be a promise and an apology. Shanks dropped the hat onto the girl's head, who instantly looked up at him in awe. It distracted her from whatever had been happening earlier, focusing her whole attention on the hat now placed on her head. I won't let you down, Shanks. Dragon watched the exchange in silence, before stepping up and grabbing Luffy's shoulder gently. Thank you for saving my daughter, red hair. Although you have ruined my plans to turn her into a good revolutionary, you have given her a goal to strive for, and saved her life. And that was how everyone aboard Shanks' ship found out that sweet, young, innocent Luffy was the son of Monkey D. Dragon, the founder and leader of a growing rebellion. Not that that had meant much at the time. Luffy beat you up? Shanks asked, letting the information settle down for a moment. Luffy, that clumsy little girl who was so meticulously trained by both Dragon and Garp, had landed a hit on Hawkeye. And left damage. Suddenly, he burst into uncontrollable laughter, along with a few other crewmates. The warlord only sent a sweeping glare across them. Many did not stop, but roared louder if anything. I thought you would like to know, Mihawk muttered, his eyes narrowed on the laughing men. Shanks was surprised though. Even though she had been raised by Dragon, he didn't imagine that he would be able to take Mihawk by surprise. Let's celebrate. Grab the drinks. Shanks cheered, despite his already drunken state. Mihawk rolled his eyes, but allowed the red-headed pirate to pour him a glass of sake as the crew cheered loudly.